Motion number 2, Centenary of the First World War.
Thank you. Call a member for Baulkham Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move on behalf of the Leader of the House that this House notes 1, that on Tuesday the 4th of August 1914 at 11 p.m. Great Britain declared war on Germany. 2, that on Wednesday the 5th of August 1914 the Legislative Assembly of New South Wales met at 4 p.m. and the Premier, the Honourable W.A. Holman, made a ministerial statement in regard to the declaration of war, indicating to the House the need for legislation, quote, to give the government certain powers which would be used at discretion, unquote, and that Cabinet, quote, had offered to place unreservedly the whole resources of the state to the Commonwealth and expressed a resolute determination to be united in front of the common danger. And 3, the sacrifices made by the men and women of New South Wales and Australia during the Great War. Madam Acting Speaker, on the 4th of August at 11 p.m, Britain declared war on Germany. As had been made abundantly clear prior to the war, when both sides of politics pledged to support Britain to the last man and the last shilling, the inevitable consequence was that Australia was also at war with Germany. The lights across Europe went out, and it was going to be the role of the British Empire to relight the lights. Some say that the First World War was unique because we didn't know what we were fighting for, that the war was the result of a series of diplomatic blunders, an error of history. But there is so much more to the Great War than error. We went to war as part of a united empire, united in its belief in parliamentary democracy, in the dignity of the individual, the fundamental freedoms of persons. We went to war with a foe which didn't believe in that, which didn't believe in parliamentary democracy, but an aristocratic ruling class which didn't believe in the dignity of the individual. It invaded Belgium, which didn't believe in the fundamental freedoms of the individual, but instead an expansion of nation. Those who fought in the First World War were not fighting due to diplomatic errors, they were fighting to preserve the fundamental freedoms that we still enjoy today. Rupert Brooke wrote in his poem, The Soldier, quote, "If I should die, think only this of me, that there is some corner of a foreign field that is forever England." Anzac Cove is forever Australia. 8,709 Australians died at Gallipoli. No battlefield is ingrained in our national consciousness than Gallipoli. 99 years on, thousands still go on pilgrimage to Turkey each year to pay their respects to those who gave their lives. It is at Gallipoli that we fought as a federated nation for the first time. It has become part of what makes us Australian. We honour our diggers every year on the 25th of April, commemorating what was ultimately a military failure, but a failure which showcased the best of Australia: tenacity, courage, mateship. Our diggers displayed the values that continue to inspire our nation and are the values which have driven our nation since. Gallipoli gave the world a preview of what was to come from Australia and the promise of what was then a young federated nation, a promise that we are now fulfilling. On the day we went to war, the Premier said that the Cabinet, quote, had offered to place unreservedly the whole resources of the state and, quote, expressed a resolute determination to be united in front of the common danger. Madam Acting Speaker, 2 members listened to the Premier, Liberal member for Armidale, George Frederick Braun, and the Labor member for Willoughby, Edward Larkin. They paid the ultimate sacrifice. They lost their lives at Gallipoli defending the values of freedom in which Australia and this House was founded. The first legislator to enlist was Lieutenant Colonel Braun. He had previously served in the Australian Infantry Regiment. On the formation of the Australian Imperial Force, he was appointed to raise and train the 2nd Battalion, which was raised within a fortnight of war being declared. He was its commanding officer. He trained them with toughness and expected high levels of competency and discipline. But he also led by example a vegetarian, teetotaling, non-smoker, who was obsessed with physical fitness, much like myself. His own men paid tribute to his courage and gallantry. and Charles Bean said that he displayed, quote, every quality of a really great leader. He was shot by a sentry after failing to hear the sentry's call. He was a great loss. Whilst Lieutenant Colonel Braun's death was an accident and not as a result of conflict, it was not inconsequential. 1,800 people died at Gallipoli on the first day. Whilst the objective was not achieved and the mission was a failure, their deaths were not meaningless. Even if an accident of navigation, a failure to account for a strong current, their death was not meaningless. The deaths of all soldiers have meaning given to them by the values for which they fought for, meaning given to them for sacrifice, to nation. That is not to say that this was a terrible waste when so many lost their lives, but there was meaning. Lieutenant Colonel Braun was 48 years old when he died, but many were much younger. The age of enlistment in 1914, legally, was 21, but 18 with parental permission. We will never know how many lied about their age. We will never know how many died in a war before they reached their 18th birthday. We do not know how many of our youth were lost. But we do know that the youngest known Australian to die was the New South Wales-born Private James Charles Martin from Coamwell. Jim was 14 years and 3 months when he enlisted in April 1915, and he died 6 months later on the 25th of October, suffering from enteritis. Just days earlier, he wrote to his family, quote, "Don't worry about me, as I'm doing splendid over here." Fortunately for his family, his death was able to be confirmed. Many of the dead were known only unto God. The horror of the war meant that many bodies were unidentifiable. Whether at the killing fields of Lone Pine or the trenches of the Western Front, Australians died, and we do not know who they were. We do not know where they are buried. But we still will honour them. This House will honour them and every other soldier that has fought in the First World War and wars and conflicts since. The doctors and nurses and medical orderlies were constantly stressed, constantly under-resourced. Sister Ella Tucker wrote, quote, 24/4/15, Red Letter Day, Gabateep. The wounded think the old ship is heaven after the peninsula. There are 557 patients on board and only 7 nurses. Crowded, without ventilation and at sea, the conditions were not hygienic. They were not even clean, even by the standards of the day. And despite their best efforts, the nurses and patients suffered from seasickness. Once off the hospital ships and the Australian General Hospitals at the Greek islands, hospitals were grossly under-resourced. It shows how stretched Australia was during the First World War. Matron Wilson wrote, quote, 9 August, found 150 patients lying on the ground, no equipment whatsoever, had no water to drink or even wash. Quote, 11 August, convoy arrived, about 400, no equipment whatsoever, just laid the men on the ground and gave them a drink. Very many badly shattered. Nearly all stretcher cases. Tents were erected over them as quickly as possible. All we can do is feed them and dress their wounds. A good many died. Madam Acting Speaker, the nurses worked to save as many of our hostile soldiers as possible. They didn't have a cushy job in the war. Whilst not at the front, they were in cramped shifts in overburdened makeshift hospitals. At AGH3, they didn't even have a bath tent, for there was not enough water. We must never forget those that helped the soldiers protect our freedoms and support them once they return. In the state of New South Wales, we gave much money and resources. We produced arms at Lithgow, promoted peace bonds, knitted socks. The Cobar Ladies Jam Club produced over 2 tonnes of jam in 1916, but most of all, we gave men. Men who fought, men who lost their lives. In New South Wales, the highest proportion of males between the ages of 18 and 44 enlisted than any other state in Australia, almost 40%. It is remarkable that so many people felt the need to enlist, but it shows the sense of sacrifice and service that characterised the people of New South Wales. It shows that the people of New South Wales were prepared to stand up and do the job that had to be done. Many Australians were awarded the highest possible honour for a soldier, the Victoria Cross, with a simple description, quote, For valour, valour is not simply bravery or courage, or as Google defines it, valour is courage when in danger, and if there is no danger, nothing can be courageous. Valour requires going beyond the call of duty, not for yourself, but because you know it has to be done. It requires standing up and doing the job that has to be done by placing yourself at risk and in the service of others. One New South Wales Welshman who did that was Private Hamilton. He enlisted on the 15th of September in 1914, aged 18. When he was 19 at Lone Pine, he was cited as, quote, during a heavy bomb attack by the enemy on the newly captured position of Lone Pine, Private Hamilton, with utter disregard for personal safety, exposed himself under heavy fire on the Parotus in order to secure a better firing position against the enemy's bomb throwers. His coolness and daring example had an immediate effect. The defence was encouraged and the enemy driven off without a loss, unquote. From his position, he was able to tell those in the trenches where to throw the bombs, whilst maintaining sniper fire. He served in the army again during the Second World War, attaining the rank of captain, embodying the step-up culture of New South Welshmen, which the war often illustrated. Madam Acting Speaker, we can never forget the sacrifices of those who answered the call and stepped forward to defend our country and its values. We are forever in their debt. On the 4th of August 2014 at 11 p.m, Britain was at... On the 4th of August 1914 at 11 p.m, Britain was at war with Germany. A war that would continue for over 4 years until an armistice was declared on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. During that time, the war saw many atrocities. It saw an entire generation go into the trenches. Many did not return. Madam Acting Speaker, the First World War irrevocably changed the world. Whilst we won, it was an enormous loss. It has enormous cost, and we owe our lives and our freedoms to those who fought for our nation and our values in the First World War, lest we forget.